Well done. Good evening. I'm going to pass some handouts. If you could take one and pass them back, please and thank you. So this will help you follow along and take a couple of less notes. It's got all the plant names, including the Latin, because I know that that's what's most important. So my name is Donna. I am a tree-hugging dirt worshiper. Raise your hand if you're a kindred spirit. We've got a couple. Yeah, I know about you. So I grew up in Brookfield on John's Road, which was named after Grandpa because it was part of the old farm. And when we were growing up, we listened to Dad tell all the new neighbors, I remember walking behind a horse and plow over these fields. Sure, Dad, blah, blah, blah. Well, when we were growing up, there's Dad, there's our garden. Growing up, it was about 65 by 65. So you can picture that, might have been 70. I was probably a young teenager before I realized that people actually buy vegetables. You know that? Who knew? I mean, in wintertime, we would buy iceberg lettuce, but that was it. My mother canned and pickled and froze and otherwise preserved things all summer long with no air conditioning. Thank you very much. God rest her soul. But that's what we ate from. That garden right there, that raised 3 kids. And that man just lived in that garden. Before work, after work, he worked shifts at Kimberly-Clark. But the best thing is, just in the last few years, one of my cousins came across some pictures that I had never seen before. I mean, this was a farm family. They didn't have money to take pictures. And she found a picture of the horses that Dad would plow the fields with. And there's Dad, and there's Grandpa. Hi, Grandpa. Extra points if you know what this is. Corn, keep going. Corn stalks. Corn stalks, also known as, I'll give you a hint. This is a silo. This silage, exactly. After you've harvested all your corn, then you harvest the silage. You don't let those corn stalks go to waste. You chop them up, you put them in the silo, and your animals can eat that for the winter. Farmers don't waste anything. So those are the horses that Dad plowed the fields with. And I always thought he was just giving us a line of, but sure enough, my dad is the one who got me into gardening, really not vegetable gardening. For many, many years, vegetable gardening was just work. Now I am part of the Giving Garden in Brookfield, where we are a food pantry garden. We grow produce for the local food pantries, soup kitchens, so forth, all volunteer labor. If anybody's interested in more information, all of these green handouts that I have up here have to do with the Giving Garden. We're having our planting day on May 31st. We would love to have as many bodies there as we can. And if you don't know anything about gardening, that's even more reason to come out, because we are 50% about growing produce for people who are hungry and 50% about teaching people how to garden. So that's the Giving Garden. But the real way that Dad kind of indoctrinated me with gardening was when he was a little kid. He won a prize. He was actually in 1st grade. He won a prize because he could name more wildflowers than anyone else in the entire school. And there were more than a dozen kids in the one-room schoolhouse next to the farmhouse. So that was kind of a big deal. I asked him many years later, I had made a bouquet of wildflowers, and there was one that I couldn't quite find in the wildflower book. I couldn't figure out if it's lady's thumb or if it's smartweed or precisely which one it was. And he says, that's kajazaya. I said, I beg your pardon? Turns out all of these wildflower names he knew, they were either in Polish or Slovak. Like, thank you. That was very helpful. But I found one of those flowers years later because, there are weeds everywhere. And I asked one of my aunts, I said, what is this? She says, that's kajazaya. There we go. Okay, he got it right. I still don't know which one it is, but Dad got it right. So let's talk about meditation. Meditation is a different concept for every person. Does it entail sitting in lotus position with a spine that is so straight it is the envy of myself and other people who don't have that posture? I couldn't sit in lotus position when I was her age. But do I have to do that in order to meditate? This is more my speed. Sit in a nice chair, just sit quietly. Maybe have a flower to focus on. Maybe you need to lie down and close your eyes in order to meditate. My neck hurts looking at this, but if that's working for her, then that's her meditation. What constitutes a meditation garden? Is it sitting and journaling? Maybe it is. Although, please don't garden in these shoes. Dang, girl. That's a broken ankle waiting to happen. But that's nice. That's meditative. It's gentle. And it's what she wants to do. Meditation, it's all subjective. So maybe we need to be doing some plein air painting. If I could paint, I would definitely do that. As the first picture that was up there was, of course, Monsieur Monet's water lilies. This is Monsieur Monet, as painted by John Singer Sargent, being painted while he's painting. Pretty meta for that age, when you think about it. But that's his meditation. That's what he does. That's what he needs. That's what feeds his soul, wherever he may be at this point. Does it need to be a Zen garden? Do we need to have an area that's dedicated to being raked every day? A Zen garden, the pebbles that are raked in this manner are supposed to mimic water. And the natural elements are supposed to mimic a landscape. So this is supposed to be mountains and gigantic trees. This is actually the same garden at two different points in its life. This is earlier, this is later. These stones. The same. No garden is ever finished. Well, I mean, if it's plastic, you know, but then it's not a garden, is it? But if maybe that's what a garden is for you. And if that's what a garden is for you, then that's correct. The answer to any of these questions is yes. Maybe we need a labyrinth. If you want to go to the cathedral at Chartres, you can find an 11-circuit labyrinth. That's a lot of circuits. Pretty cool. A labyrinth is not a maze. You will not get lost in a labyrinth. There's only one way in and one way out. A maze, you can get lost. Freaks me out just a little bit, not gonna lie. I don't see why not. I appreciate that, and thank you for asking. Gentleman asked if he could take pictures. I'll pose. So this does not feel meditative to me, but again, if it's meditative to you, then that's what you should be doing. That's a lot of hedge trimming, not gonna lie. A lot of work. But, you know, honestly, when they first put this in place, that was a whole heck of a lot of work. And it's a lot of work to maintain all of those plants. There's a lot of plants there. I would hazard a guess that that's a few different kinds of thyme, might be a couple of other things thrown in, but what a beautiful place. A lot of different ways that we can do labyrinths. Do you need me to go back for any of your pictures? You're good. So this is another 11-circuit labyrinth that they just laid out with stones. This is technically not a labyrinth. This is just a spiral. There's nothing complicated about it at all, but it's got the same concept as a labyrinth. It's one way in, one way out. This is a nice soft texture. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circuit. Six circuit labyrinth. I've got a handout up here that gives you information on how to create a labyrinth in terms of just laying it out. It's surprisingly simple. And then you have to actually do the landscape work, which is not the easy part, but the layout, by gosh, that's mighty simple. This is my favorite. This is completely my favorite. This is just, to me, the idea of something so ephemeral as a labyrinth. I just eat that up. It just makes me so happy to think about that. I had a friend many years ago who created labyrinths, and she created a temporary labyrinth for this workshop that we did. And she just got a bunch of old wooden, the peg style clothespins, and put them in the ground and did ribbon around them. And it was perfect. It was everything that we needed. It was absolutely perfect. That's leaves. They mowed the leaves. Right? Exactly. Exactly. That's why I say completely ephemeral. This is a one-shot deal because I ain't going out there every day mowing that. Or the wind blows. So a water feature is another thing that a lot of people feel very strongly. They want the sound of that water in their meditation gardens. So a lot of options when it comes to fountains and so forth. You can get bought-in ones. You can make your own with a waterfall. You can even have a container one with a spitting frog fountain to have on the deck. You know, this is, of course, a stock watering trough that you could get. I would hazard a guess you could get that at Agway or some Tractor Supply, places like that. Yeah, a lot of good options for that. Make sure your deck will carry that amount of water, because that's a lot of weight. So if your deck is a little bit on the rickety side, maybe put it on the lawn instead. If you have ever heard a Zen fountain, you can hear this picture. It's got a tick, tock, tick, tock kind of sound to it. This is a receptacle. The water comes from here, and this will stand back up again, and it will fill with water, and then it will pour out, and then it will stand back up again, and it'll fill with water, and it'll pour out, and that's where the tick tock comes into play. And it's really a lovely meditative sound in conjunction with that trickle of water. Another thing that you can have is these, they're kind of neat. They're bells, and the tone of them changes when they fill with water. So if it's been raining out, it's a really neat option. So that brings us to chimes and such things. Be careful with your choices if you decide to put chimes or something like that in your garden for sound, because if you have something like this or something like the bells on the prior page, they are literally musically tuned. So with the tubular chimes like this, the longer the chimes are, the deeper the sound. So I have a set of the tubular chimes where the longest one is probably 5 feet long. And of course, the little circular wooden dealy bopper in the middle is the clapper. And then down at the bottom of the string, there's something like this that catches the wind and moves the clapper. Yes. So the question is, do chimes discourage birds and other wildlife? I've not experienced that. My bear doesn't seem to care, but he might be deaf. I don't know. Yes. Ah, okay. So the comment was that we've got some winged insects that will build their nests up inside the chimes. So we have to get the pipe cleaner out for those little suckers. To me, the tubular chimes are a lovely sound because, again, they're musically tuned. This is not musically tuned. This, oddly enough, sounds like silverware. This sounds like crockery. If that is a sound that you like, then that's perfectly wonderful for your garden. Fair warning, you get a really good windstorm, this one is going to bust to smithereens. Yes, that is the voice of experience. It's all about what you're looking for. We had one of the tubular chimes that was much smaller. I think the longest tube was probably 15 inches or so, and it was much more high pitched. And the wind catcher, if you will, apparently it was quite efficient because that thing would clang like crazy with the slightest breeze. So we finally had to take the wind catcher off the bottom of the blessed thing because it was getting a little too carried away. But just make a conscious choice if you decide to put chimes in the garden. You can have a gong if you want something that sounds like a temple of some sort. My husband actually made this bell, and he has a nice wooden clapper for it. Something else to give thought to, if you have something that is metal that is going to make the sound, give thought to what you're using as the clapper for it. Because if you're using something metal to hit that piece of metal, the sound is very sharp. If you're using something wooden or rubber clad or leather clad, something like that, what you're hearing is the sound of your instrument, not the sound of the clanking metal striker. And it's softer, exactly. And with things like these, the resonance can go for the longest time. You know, you hit them and it's really a lovely, lovely, lovely thing. So in meditation, in formal meditation, we typically have a visual focus of some sort. Now, if we were indoors meditating, having a single candle would be a perfectly good focus. If we're outdoors meditating and we want a candle, please put that in something glass because it ain't gonna stay lit if you don't. For those of us who, as an interfaith minister, I've conducted dozens and hundreds of weddings, and we've all been to weddings in churches where they do the unity candle. Yeah, that don't work outdoors. It just, you know, the symbolism is gone. May your lives, oh darn, there it goes. But outdoors, have a little glass container and your candle will stay lit and it'll be a little safer. Let's be honest with that. Maybe you just want to have a statue or just a simple stone or four as your visual focus. Maybe you want to have Miss Kuan Yin. This is in my friend's garden in Colorado, which hers was always my ideal of gardens because she had so much wonderful stuff there that was reseeding itself and being exuberant. And yeah, there was a little bit of room for weeds, but not much. Not much to be had at all. So have, if you want that focus, have a statue that speaks to you. This is a little busy for me. I have great respect for Chihuly. He's done all sorts of displays in the, I think, NYBG. This is also probably about 5 feet tall. So it's a bit much for a visual focus for a meditation. But again, this is not my garden. This is your garden. And if that speaks to you, then that's what you should do. One thing I will say about this, the color of this piece, the way that it works with the foliage around it is perfect. That to me is very meditative. It's very gentle. Now, the blues kind of add a little bit of an exclamation point, but that might be what you want. It's your garden. If you want to put a bunch of rebar in and put a bunch of pretty blue bottles out there for a visual, that's what you do. If you find it meditative, if you find that it relaxes you, that's really the key. Meditation is about allowing us to chill out. Because Lord knows we have enough in our lives right now that is not chill. So we need a little chill space, and our gardens really need to be that space. Maybe we just need a fire pit and a ratty old Adirondack chair. This is my yard. This one, not this. I want this, but you know, this is my yard. This is my compost pile over here. Maybe you need a moon gate. I have moon gate envy. Maybe you need that kind of compost pile. I don't know. I just think that's quite lovely. The focus, whatever focus you choose, let it be something that you love. Without looking at your handout, what is this? Close. Hmm? It could be. That wasn't its primary incarnation. Anything else? Wild gift. Looks like it does kind of look like a grafting. I will give you a hint. This and this are two different things. This is a vine that's climbing. It does, doesn't it? This is poison ivy climbing a trunk of an old stump, or specifically an old cedar tree. So poison ivy, when it climbs anything, one of the ways to identify it is that lateral branching. Whether it's going up the side of a tree trunk or reaching the top of something, it's always going to branch out at that 90-degree angle. They are pretty thick. It's been there for a while. My husband and I were looking at a piece of property a few years ago, and he looked over into the side yard there. He says, "Oh, look, what kind of tree is that?" I was like, "Don't go near that. Don't you touch that." I don't recommend that, really. Oh, it's in the fall. It's in the fall. Yeah, the question was, why isn't it green? But yeah, it's in the fall. Right? Right. Okay. Yeah, that's I love that picture. I just think that's quite, it kind of does. It kind of does. Sort of like Beaker from the Muppets. So one of the things that you want to have in your garden is someplace to sit. And again, that's got to be something that appeals to you, whether it's just a simple log or, a fancified log, Adirondack chair, an actual meditation chair, or something where you can lie down and be in the shade and really chillax for a while. Something tells me that this is just a wall covered in plastic ivy, but hey, they're trying to sell the outdoor bed. They're doing a lovely job with it. Someplace that's comfortable for you. So what I like is the glider. I think the glider, that reminds me of Grandma's porch. The squeak, exactly, that sound. And I love the fact that this has obviously gotten some use because we've got the bare spot underneath it. But yeah, maybe you want a swing of some sorts, a little bit of movement. I like the idea of a little bit of movement. And, being able to, even if it's a rocking chair on a porch, just have that little something going on, and it makes it just another little level, a little bit of moving meditation. Maybe you want to just have a stump to sit on. Well, I think that I mean, they did a nice job with the carving. I think that's quite a look, but it doesn't look super comfortable. This is definitely my speed, especially with the apple tree behind it. I think I have this exact bench with this exact amount of lichen all over it. But that's, as I said, that's my speed. I'm more about just chill. One of the great things that you can do for yourself in designing your garden is to give it some sort or form of enclosure. Now, you don't have to have a big giant sunken garden with the benches and the huge walls or anything. These are people-sized benches. This plant here is on your handout. This is Petasites. Butterbur is one of the common names for it. Be very, very careful if you plant Petasites, because once you have it, you will never not have it. And that is not a plant that you want to mess with. That's Jurassic Park sized plant. So make sure that you know what you're doing. Yes, question. Most of them are, but no, not all of them. Not all of them. That's it. The question was whether the plants are native to Connecticut. Most of my talks will center on native plants, but with this one, I threw a few other ones in, but I'll try to give you the information on which ones are not native. So Petasites is definitely not native. In terms of seeding? So yeah. The comment was that the Petasites is similar to Rosa Sharon. My understanding of the pedicites, because it's an herbaceous plant, it's not a woody plant, is whether it's seeds or not, it will also go by runners. And that's where it becomes problematic. The Rosa Sharon just will seed. And yes, you have seedlings until the cows come home. But yeah, they're all over the place. But it is huge. If you look at, as I said, these are normal size benches. This is not a Barbie doll set. That leaf right there is the same size as that bench seed. So that's why I say this is not a plant to mess with. You do not put it someplace where you don't want to have it forever. When I say enclosure, I don't, as I said, I don't want you to necessarily think that you need to have this beautiful sunken garden. You can have a screen house. You can have, I love this. Somebody got 5 doors and just hobbed this together. It's not going to last for decades, but it's adorable. It's just a little spot where they can get some shade, be just away. And that's really the concept of having an enclosure for a meditation garden. It's not that you need to be in a phone booth or a stadium. You need to be someplace where people are going to look and say, oh, she's in her meditation spot. We're going to leave her alone. Just let her be. And ideally, where someone's not going to sneak up behind you and go boo. Not that any of us have people like that in our lives. A nook. So one of the things that you'll note about all 3 of these nooks is that they are all approachable with a nice navigable set of stones. Make sure that you can get to your meditation spot without having to jump through the foliage or jump through the mud or slog through the mulch or whatever it may be. So this is a smaller scale pedicites there. We've got some nice hostas here and there. One of the things that I like for my ideal meditation garden is a lot of foliage, maybe some flowers, but whatever plants I have around me, I want them to be fairly idiot proof, really low maintenance, because I don't want my meditation garden to be a place where I'm sitting there trying to be quiet and I say, oh crap, I need to snip that off over there. You know, if we're constantly jumping up to weed or to maintain or to do or to fuss or to deadhead, that's not necessarily going to be meditative. Again, you guys get to decide how you want it to be. That's for me, because my constant thing is, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this. Because I can't remember who said it. There's a great garden quote. A beautiful garden is not made by singing, oh, how lovely, and sitting in the shade. And it's true. So one of the plants that I would recommend is Wisteria frutescens. This is the America, the native wisteria. It's slightly different in habit from the Chinese wisteria, which is the one that you see in the wild here and there because it has escaped cultivation. It's all the way up those phone poles on that one stretch of road. And it's beautiful. But let's be honest, the vast majority of invasive species were introduced as ornamentals. So when we talk about invasives and people say, oh, but it's so pretty, I know. So this is the Chinese wisteria. Note how rugged this guy is. Ain't nobody gonna win in a fight against him. Absolutely lovely, but the American wisteria is a much nicer option. Ilex opaca, American holly. These first few plants that I'm talking about here are nice options for hedging and or an enclosure, some sort of defining for your area. One of the great things about American holly, if you look at the way that the leaves are shaped, I don't think there's enough difference between this and the English holly to be of no never mind. The American holly, being part of the environment, I can tell you where it's growing wild in Brookfield. our bees and insects and birds have evolved along with this plant. So there's that wonderful relationship that they have where they depend upon each other. The holly has certain insects that it wants to pollinate it. It feeds those insects with its berries. Everybody's happy together. Why would you not grow the American version? As with anything in the Ilex family, you're going to need a male and a female plant. One male is fine for a good number of females. The females are the only ones that will give you the berries. The males are perfectly lovely for their foliage. And one of the cool things about the American holly, this guy can get 20 feet tall if you want him to. So if you want a big honking hedge, I mean, this is not a small hedge here. If you want a really big, tall one, their natural shape, if they're not in a hedge planting, if they're just left alone to their own devices, they go in a conical shape. So they look sort of like a holly Christmas tree. They're really, really neat. So you've got nice options with Ilex opaca, American holly. Taxus, this is an English plant. This is not native at all. If you want to fuss a lot in the garden and prune the living daylights out of things, by all means, Taxus is great. Taxus is really delicious for the deer. So bear that in mind. That could be a bit of an issue. Thuja occidentalis, Eastern arborvitae. This is a native plant. We love thuja. When it's younger, it looks like this. When it is 40, 50, 60 years old, you get some beautiful, beautiful wood to it. One of the great things about arborvitae, you can reliably use this plant to tell exactly how tall your deer are, unfortunately. So if you have got the long-term goal of the really cool wood, well, you can just suck this up until it gets older and it starts to be more about the trunk. But if you want to protect it from this, there's netting, there's deer sprays, there's different options for that. But yes, know that that is going to be one of the hazards. A good alternative for that is Juniperus virginiana. This is another native plant, Eastern red cedar. There are all sorts of hybrids from the creeping juniper to all sorts of tall, skinny ones and tall, fat ones and not so tall ones. Look for the one that is the shape that you're looking for. And these guys are very close to being bulletproof. If you are raising anything apple related, ornamental crab apple or actual apple fruit trees, red cedar and apple trees are, there's a proper word, but it's escaping me. Basically, they are co-hosts for something called cedar apple rust. On the apple trees, it makes a little damage for the fruit. On the cedar trees, it makes these strange galls. And well, when they start out, they're brown and they're sort of golf ball size, maybe a little bit smaller, but they're fungal. And when they sporinate, the things that were on that brown golf ball-ish looking thing that looked sort of like divots, they looked a little bit like, you know, the eyes on potatoes, that kind of thing. Yeah, from each one of those sort of pores oozes this orange gelatinous, that's the technical term. And that's when the fungus is sending out its quote unquote seeds, it's sporinating. So it goes back and forth from that form to the apple trees. So that's why Blue Jay Orchards is not a fan of cedar trees. But if you're not an apple grower, cedars are a great option. And again, being a native plant, hugely important for our native birds. The cedar waxwing is a big fan of the berries. And if you are into making your own gin, juniper berries are a requirement for that. Another native plant, Pinus strobus, eastern white pine, in its natural state, eastern white pine will grow, I believe, 50 to 80 feet tall. It's a big honking tree. The hybridizers have gotten hold of it. There are dwarf versions, there are median versions. This, I don't know if this is just a normal one that's had the bejeebers pruned out of it, or what the deal is. It's so soft. It's so gentle. And this is that pine scent. You walk through a pine forest and it's eastern white pine. You can just smell that scent. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you don't have one of the hybrids that's meant to be smaller, then pruning it into this shape is eventually going to damage the tree to the point where it's not going to be happy. It will eventually say, you know what, stop beating me up. And it'll either croak or it'll send out some weird branches that are just not conducive to continuing in that role in life. So there's an old adage that the second best time to plant a tree is today, and the best time is 20 years ago. So if we're talking about weeping beech, the actual best time is about 2 generations ago, at least. This plant is probably 80 years old, and it is that gorgeous. Do you remember when you were a kid and you had that fort underneath the forsythia? We all did. I know you did. This is the grown-up version. There is a place in Madison. It's a retreat center. It's called Mercy Center. And they have one of these guys out front. One of the cool things about a weeping beech is it tends to have branches at peculiar angles. And at about this height, there is a lateral branch that must go out about 30 feet. And it's this big around. You want to talk meditation, you can go up to that branch and just hold it, and you can feel the tree move. It is the coolest thing in the world. Oh, it's just glorious. So plant your beech tree now, and your great-great-grandchildren will thank you. One thing that I should say, though, right in the middle of right now, beech trees are having a hard time. We have a beech leaf disease. It's if you're familiar with beech leaves, the veining on them is pretty prominent. And in between the veins, it's almost like looking at a stained glass window. There'll be, this section is almost clear and this section is very dark green. It's a fungal thing. It's carried on raindrops. We're not quite sure how to thwart it at this point. So there are some problems with it. But I say, you know what, plant your weeping beech and give it a shot. I believe all of them. Yeah, the natives, the introduced, all of them. Yeah. So the question was whether weeping trees in general need to be near water. Weeping willows do, right? Well, I should say, weeping willows are very happy if they're near water, because willows by their nature like their feet wet. But the beech and weeping cherries and these kinds of things, they don't necessarily need to be near water. If you have a willow of any sort, you can have it really wherever it is that you have it. The garden where my dad was sitting, when we were growing up, we had a willow tree at the corner of that garden. It was at the crest of a hill. There was no water there. And you know what? That entire corner of the garden was dry as a bone. Dad finally had to take the tree down because it was sucking all the water. If you have a spot where you want to plant something to mitigate a lot of groundwater, a weeping willow is an awesome option. A number of different willows would be an awesome option for that because they transpire a lot of water. They're fun. So let's talk a little bit about flowers for a meditation garden. I am an exuberant gardener when it comes to color. More is more in my garden. But if you want something meditative, you might want something a little more gentle than my color palette. So this lady, I have her in my Moon Gardens lecture, in which we talk about something called reflectance. And what that boils down to is color rendering in moonlight. And as we know, when you think about it, color rendering in moonlight is not so hot. We can see whites, and you can sort of see yellows a little bit, but mostly it's the whites or the whites. That's because the color from the moon, excuse me, the light from the moon is reflected light. The sun is shining on the moon and it's reflected back at us. That by itself isn't the whole story, though. The surface of the moon is actually the color of pavement. We think the moon is white. But think about it, in the summertime, can you get a real good glare off the road? Sure you can. That's what's happening with the moon. It's sending back all that light to us, but because it's coming off of a dark surface, it's changing how much of the color spectrum it's going to send off to us so that we can use. So that's why with a moon garden, you want whiter flowers so that you can get that reflectance, or the silver foliage. So you can see the foliage on these silines up here. So a moon garden, a little bit more white, a little bit of water, a few plants. Sure. Gotta get everything, gotta get everything. So a few plants for a meditation garden. So Clethra alnifolia, this is a native plant. This is the way that God made it. This is the way the hybridizers made it. If you decide to grow Clethra, Clethra is a beautiful shrub. They call it summer sweet because it blooms in August. Who blooms in August? Nobody blooms in August. It's hot and miserable in August. This guy blooms in August and has a beautiful scent. So with the scent, be conscious of your placement. I made the mistake a few years ago of planting some Asiatic lilies right next to my deck. The scent knocks you over when you come out the door onto the deck. So they could be further away. Be conscious of where you put your scented things. Some things are very subtly scented, and that's much easier to take. The Clethra, it's a subjective thing. So get a feeling for how it smells. Find it in bloom, give it a sniff. One of the things that goes along with the fact that this guy blooms late, he leaves out late in the spring. So if you plant him in the fall and you look at him in April, even into May, and you say, oh crap, he died. He didn't die. Give him another month. He'll start to leaf out eventually. He just takes his time. Clethra in the wild is found at the edges of ponds or swamps or these kinds of places. One of the cool things about this plant is if you spend the first couple of years settling it in really well, watering it really deeply. I'm not saying go out water every day with little once a week or so, make sure it gets like 3 inches of water so that those roots go really, really deep. If you do that and you settle him in well, he will be so drought tolerant that you won't have to worry about him ever again. At the Extension Center here in Bethel, we used to have one of these guys in what I call the hell strip. We have a building that faces west. It's got a flower garden and it's got a parking lot. It's also known as a reflector oven. And when they planted a Clethra in there many, many years ago, they settled it in exactly right, watered it super deeply, and that plant was bulletproof until they redesigned the garden. But I digress. Syringa vulgaris, lilac, these guys will be coming out soon, soon, soon. Please. Lilacs, if you decide to put lilac in the garden, if you don't have them already, try to find something that is mildew resistant. Because of our beastly humid summers, we always get powdery mildew on our lilacs. It doesn't kill the plant, but it does stress it out. So there's no sense stressing them unnecessarily. I'm a big fan of the simple flowers, the white flowers, the simple purple flowers. If you get the fancier flowers, you'll probably sacrifice some of the scent. So the doubled flowers or the striped flowers or any of that monkey business, but that's a super old-fashioned, beautiful scent. Philadelphus virginalis, mock orange. These guys, the scent of these is just heavenly. Nice, open, borderline floppy habit, but they can get nice and tall, and just another really soft plant to have in the garden. And again, being a shrub rather than a perennial, a lot less fuss. Big fan of less fuss. So here's a plant that you may not have even heard of, Deutzia gracilis, not native, but it's a really underused plant. It has, the habit is similar to forsythia, so that sort of arching habit. There's some low growing forms. Again, the hybridizers go crazy with these, but it's just such a nice, the deer don't like it at all, which is not to say that it is deer proof. What's the first thing you learn as a master gardener? You can have all sorts of lists of plants that deer won't eat. Deer can't read. Exactly. Or it's a young one, or it's a bored one, whatever it is. They'll take a nibble here and there. But the Deutzia has got such a nice soft habit to it. I really enjoy this, just again, for a sort of background plant. And this Chardonnay Pearls up here has got a the more yellow foliage to it. So big fun. And of course, roses. I have a love-hate relationship with roses. I adore roses, and I can kill them by looking at them. May they rest in peace. If you've ever been to Elizabeth Gardens, Elizabeth Park in West Hartford, oh, you're new to the area? West Hartford, oldest public rose garden in the US.
In Hartford, West Hartford.
Yes, okay.
West Hartford.
I thought it was the West Hartford exit, but be that as it may. Yes. Yeah. It is on Hartford proper. Okay, okay. Yes, if you just Google up Elizabeth Gardens, you'll find Elizabeth Gardens, and they're beautiful. If you can go there in June when the docents are talking, they'll give you a guided tour, and oh, it's so cool. And if you want to do an archway of climbing roses for your meditation garden, by all means, let me know when I should come and visit you. I'll wear my flowing white 100-year-old gown, and oh, beautiful. Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact. So Physocarpus opulifolius, Eastern ninebark. This is a native plant. And I often say I only became a master gardener so that I could say Physocarpus opulifolius. This is a really neat plant. It's another one that you usually find in the wild in moister areas, but it doesn't require the moist areas. It's pretty bulletproof. Sort of a gangly, shrubby habit to it. The way God made it was just with green leaves without speckles, and these really nice clusters of flowers. Sometimes they're sort of dome-shaped clusters, sometimes they're snowball clusters. And of course, you know, the hybridizers just have to go crazy with these things. I had a lady at one of my lectures say, "Oh, is this one cursed?" I was like, "No, sweetie, it's just called Diablo because it's black, that's all." But one of the things about ninebark is it has really neat seed heads. So even after the flowers go by, the seed heads are neat looking, and they'll persist through the winter and dry and so forth. They all flower. I just didn't get pictures with the blossoms, but yeah, they all flower. No, that's peak foliage, Copertina and center glow. That's the way the hybridizers design them. Now, they will tend toward greener foliage as the foliage ages, because let's be honest, they want to be able to photosynthesize. They need a little green, but that's how the hybridizers designed them. I don't know. Designer plants, I'm so iffy on that. But for a meditation garden, you can't go wrong with lavender. I can go wrong with lavender because my soil is too acid, and it just no like me. So if you have soil that's a little bit more alkaline than mine, really sharply drained, you're going to have really good luck with lavender. You may or may not be able to winter it over. If you're more coastal, then lavender, you can probably have a hedgerow of it. But up here, we're kind of on the ragged edge. But hey, global warming is making things better and better for lavender around here. So might be worth a shot, but there's nothing like that scent. You know, people pay a lot for that scent. Nicotiana alata, flowering tobacco. This guy, another one with a beautiful scent, another one with the soft flowers. This is actually an annual around here. So you can get real tall ones that are 6, 7 feet tall. You can get the little patio size guys. They have a nice long flowering season and they have that lovely scent to them. Physostegia virginiana, obedient plant. Obedient is subjective with this plant. This guy is in the mint family. And as we know, if something is in the mint family, it wants to run. Now, the good thing is most things in the mint family are enough shallow rooted that if they go someplace we don't want them, we just yank them out. It's not that big of a deal. But sometimes they get a little rambunctious. But fun fact, you need to know this, especially if you're a grandparent. The reason they call it obedient plant, I want you to note how the flowers grow in pretty rigid spikes here. Individual flowers in that spike stick out sort of like a comb. Well, it's called obedient plant because if you go up there and you take one of those individual flowers and you turn it, it'll stay. And that one will stay, and you can move them. It's also in pink. Yes. I don't know about purple, but it's definitely in pink. It very well might be in purple. They don't always check with me on these things. But yes, I'm a big fan of Physostegia because it's pretty bulletproof. So we have Corydalus lutea and Allium Christophii. Now this is a couple of things that really kind of planted themselves in my garden. I had started with Corydalus in a couple of places, and it self-sows quite readily. That's the yellow, whoop, come back. There we go. That's the yellow stuff. That's the Corydalus. That is about 8 or 10 inches tall. Corydalus will start blooming when your late bulbs are blooming. So your late daffodils around there. It doesn't stop blooming until the first hard frost. Now, it will self-sow. It is very shade tolerant. Strangely, it will seed itself into the sunniest areas of the garden. And until it gets to high summer, it's doing fine. Once it gets to high summer, it looks like, oh, honey, what happened to you? Cut it down. Hack it down. When it starts to look yucky, just hack it down. Has that beautiful soft foliage. It's sort of ferny. It blooms for so long that you eventually don't even notice it, which is kind of an interesting thing. And then Allium Christophii. Anything in the allium family related to onion, they all have some form of a globular flower head. The cool thing about Christophii, of course, the flower head is really open like that. They can get like 8 or 10 inches, these spherical flower heads. They dry and they look just like that. A lot of the alliums, when the flower head dries, it's like, okay, you're done. Bye-bye. These guys are great. They sit in the garden and they just kind of look like soap bubbles sitting, floating around the garden. They self-sow, but gently. So they're not going to take over like Grant took Richmond, but you will get a few extra freebie plants out of them. I love them. They only get about maybe a couple of feet tall at the most. And once the flower blooms, the greenery has already come and gone. So when the flowers are done, they're not really taking up any more visual room in the garden unless you want them to stay there with the dried flower heads. So Dicentra eximia, wild bleeding heart, native plant. This is the way God made it. This is a white form. This is the way the hybridizers made it. This guy here in its original form is another one that will bloom all summer, which just amazes me. And it keeps itself tidy. It will expand, but very gently. It's not going to self-sow like crazy. And it makes a lovely cut flower as well. Shade tolerant. And remember, most of your plants that are quote unquote shade plants, they are shade tolerant. They are not shade lovers. There are a few that are shade lovers, but most plants are tolerant of shade. People think of lily of the valley as a shade plant. It requires shade. No, lily of the valley is shade tolerant. If you plant it in the blasting sun, it's so aggressive that it'll come up through pavement. We had it around the mailbox when I was growing up, and it came up through the pavement. It was that crazy. But this guy, very shade tolerant, and we just love him. He's very sweet. Ice Follies Narcissus, those are the early ones. Mine are about to bloom any minute now. They come up with the golden throat like that, and by the time they're done, they're all white. Lots of your herbs are white blooming herbs. So you've got garlic chives. Again, these guys are in the allium family, so they have the semi-spherical heads. Yarrow, your German or Roman chamomile. The German is the tall one that's an annual. The Roman is the short one that's a perennial. They all have those beautiful white blooms, the daisy flowers to them. And then we have the nice soft foliage, Stachys byzantina lamb's ear. Helen von Stein is the hybrid that rarely, if ever, blooms. Or you can get the species that blooms like crazy. Now, I can understand why people don't love these flowers. I think they're really cool. They make a nice cut flower. And when it's done blooming, you cut them back and you'll wind up with a patch of foliage, and it's lovely. But this is a really nice, soft plant, literally and visually, for the meditation gardens. Artemisia Powys Castle, wormwood, another one with a lot of reflectance to it. This guy's got reflectance because it's got a waxy sort of scale to it. One of the nice things about this Artemisia, there's a few different ones. This one has nice posture. There's several of them out there that are just so floppy, I can't get them to stand up. They just look like birds' nests in the garden, but this guy has very nice posture. A few ferns that you can play with for some gentle presence in the meditation gardens, Athyrum, Panacetum, Alopicurioides. This is not a native, but it's a nice, soft, gentle fountain grass. Hakona grass, Japanese, obviously not a native. One of the nice things about this guy, very shade tolerant. He needs no maintenance whatsoever. I mean, if you want to trim back the dead foliage this time of year, feel free, but you don't have to. And he will expand very gently, but he doesn't take over. After 5 years, you might be able to divide and get another plant or two, but they don't get rambunctious at all. Just such a nice, gentle presence. Comptonia peregrina, sweet fern. This is not a fern. This is a wiry, I'll call it a subshrub. It's sort of halfway between a perennial and a shrub. And you get this great fall color from it. If you crush the foliage, it has a sweet scent. This is a native plant. If you ever get up to White Memorial in Litchfield, they have a patch of Comptonia up there, and it's really quite lovely. I'm sure it blooms, but I think it's one of those things like ginger where, the bloom is underneath and it's nothing to write home about. This guy's all about the foliage, and he has that nice soft habit like that. I love the way he grows. So we just need the mindfulness. We just need to pay attention, open our eyes, see what's out there to be seen. This is a photo from White Memorial. Braiding Sweetgrass is one of my holy books. It's just an amazing piece of literature. Take that time, stop and smell those roses, pick a bouquet of mixed wildflowers and garden flowers and stick them in an old tarnished silver sugar bowl. And look closely. You might need a statue for a focal point. Maybe you just need a dried leaf. You don't necessarily have to go crazy and plant all sorts of things. You might already have a meditation garden. Miss Georgia knew what she was talking about. Let that flower, that plant, let it be your world. You can dive right in there. Or lay down in the garden and look up at your borage. Your borage likes to look down, look up at it. Notice that the new blossoms are pink, but the old ones are blue. Look for those new angles. Look through new eyes. On your handout, it talks about Mycobacterium vaccae. 25 or so years ago, the scientists figured out why gardeners have always said that playing in the dirt makes us feel better. The scientists isolated Mycobacterium vaccae, which when inhaled, it appears to stimulate serotonin production. To which those of us who are gardeners would say, well, duh. Well, duh. Does anyone have questions? Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. So the comment was about a rose bush that has a wonderful scent to it from a 1902 house. And that's when the hybridizers were hybridizing for things like scent and that kind of stuff. Or they were just finding the things in the wild and saying, oh, this one's nice. Let's grow a lot of these. That's right, because the hybridizers nowadays, they have been hybridizing the plants to have longer stems or disease resistant or to bloom all summer or all of these different features to have no prickers. No prickers, it's a rose. But with all of those things, the scent has been going by the wayside, and that just breaks my heart. If you could find it in a book, you'll find it. Yeah, they're doing it. Yes, they're doing it with peonies, with all sorts of different, and that's one of the challenges with any of the hybrids. Yeah. Yeah, to have, and that's why I was saying with the clethra or any of those kinds of things, give it a sniff, find it in bloom, give it a sniff and make that decision. Because some of the roses and so forth, not so much. You had a question. That's right. Yes. So to take a trip to Elizabeth Park in West Hartford during June when they're in bloom, bring your nose. And honestly, if you look at the website for Elizabeth Gardens, they'll tell you what days and times they will have the docent there. Because they'll have a person who can say, this is this kind of rose, and this one is this, and they're brilliant. They're brilliant. Yes, you have one.
Fine growing, but in the winter when there's big snow, I make a little meditation snowboard. And it's under this big hemlock tree, and it's just so cool.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
make it like a cushion for your head, and you can look up at the tree and look at the sky. It's so
Oh,
zen.
a meditation snow fort underneath the hemlock trees in the winter time. Oh, I'm going for that next year. I am definitely going a meditation snow fort underneath the hemlocks. That's really the key to get that, especially if it's snowing and get that, and when the wind is blowing. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, the birds flying by. Oh, I love it. I love it. Any other comments? Comments, questions, ideas, anything that you need? Yes. Offhand, no. You could look in places like Gardener's Supply as a starting point. Also look at Fine Gardening Magazine. So the gentleman was asking if I knew where to get things like the Moon Gate or the Garden Gong or that kind of thing. You can talk to my husband about getting one of the bells, But yeah, I would say look to Fine Gardening Magazine, which is published right here in Newtown, because they'll have a lot of good advertisers that might point you in the right direction. It's, yeah, third week of, yeah.
Distributors that will make those things, but they also will have landscape artists that have these things set up. You know, you can ask them, or you can see if somebody's actually has a stall selling. They have all kinds of really cool.
Suggested to go to the Connecticut Flower and Garden Show. I think that's a good angle as well. We already talked about that earlier. Any other questions? I know we ran a little bit late. I apologize. Thank you, everybody, for coming.